Hey everyone, and welcome to SLO City Church at home, online, wherever you are. My name is Brent, and I'm humbled to be one of the pastors here. SLO City exists to be a collection of people that desires to live the way of Jesus and bring hope to everyone. So wherever you are today, if you're on a jog, in a car, in a living room, gathered with other people, I pray that you would run into the hope that is for you, the hope that is for everyone. And hope has a name. His name is Jesus. I'm really excited to be with you today. Today's a unique day because we're going to talk about something a little heavier and very real, the reality of trauma. We've been in a series entitled This Changes Everything. And the whole root and basis of the series has been that when we come to Jesus, when we run into Jesus, Jesus changes everything. And today specifically, we're going to talk about the reality that trauma changes things, but healing can change everything. Last week we talked about, in Mark chapter 4, how Jesus was on a boat with his disciples and they are overwhelmed with anxiety. They're overwhelmed with fear and panic. They're angry, they're anxious, they're isolated, and they're afraid. And all of these worst case scenarios are running a million miles an hour in their head. They turn to Jesus and they say, "Teacher, don't you care about us?" And he stands up. He rebukes the wind and the waves, and he says, "Peace, be still." And he invites his friends. He invites those who are in the boat with him to recognize the power of his presence, the peace and the power of just having him in the boat in that moment brought a calm to the storm that was terrifying, but brought a peace to their hearts. Now, as the storm calms down and they continue to sail on the Sea of Galilee, they inevitably end up landing on the shore of the Gerasenes. They go to this land of the Gerasenes, and in this particular place where the boat rests, there is a man who was infamous. There's this man who was renowned for his afflictions, for the things that have been oppressing him and possessing him. I want to read the story. I just want to make a couple comments, and then we're going to get into our morning. In Mark chapter 5, we read that they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs. No one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained, hand and foot. But he tore the chains apart, broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to capture him, to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and he fell on his knees in front of Jesus. And he shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus? What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." So here's the scene. Jesus has just calmed the storm in his disciples' hearts. In their minds and their hearts and their souls. They have sailed to the other side of the sea. They've landed on the shore of the Gerasenes, and there they run into a man. And let's just notice something quickly about the condition of this man that lived in the tombs. We read that there was something in his life that was binding him up, some impure or unclean spirit that drove him to live in a graveyard. This man lived in the tombs, and it says that no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. There were people in this individual's lives that were trying to chain him up, tie him down, bind him up, but they could not secure him. He tore through the chains, and he lived in the tombs. He would spend night after night after night in agony, screaming and wailing in pain and suffering. He was gashing himself with stones just so that he could feel. His whole life was torment and was trauma. What gets a person to that place? Have you thought about that? It's really easy to read this story and to go like, oh, a demon-possessed man living in the tombs, screaming his head off, night and day suffering. Okay, we get it. He runs to Jesus. But can I ask, what gets a person to a place in their life where they're alone, where they're afraid, where they're in constant agony, anxiety, suffering, where they're gashing themselves with stones just so that they could feel? What gets a person there? What experiences must he have experienced? What level of loss must he have experienced? What level of insecurity or hurt or woundedness must he have experienced to get him to this place where he's living alone in a graveyard, tormented? Did you notice what he said to Jesus? When he ran up to Jesus, he falls on Jesus' feet and he says, "Please don't torment me. Please don't torment me." Why was he asking that? Because torment and torture and trauma was all that he knew. It was all that he knew. And he falls at Jesus' feet and he says, "Please don't torment me like everybody else in my life." Now this is heavy, but this is real. Because many of us have experienced trauma in our life. What do we do with trauma? What is trauma? Where do we go with our trauma? Where is our hope in the midst of a world of suffering and pain and agony? We could sugarcoat this sermon and just skip along and talk about all the happy things in life. But what if in the real places of life, what if in the real pains of life, there is a hope, there is a way forward to heal? Today, it's my prayer that as we talk about trauma and suffering, that we would run into a healing that can change everything. And so to do this today, I've invited a really good friend. Amanda Caldwell is a licensed marriage and family therapist. And for the rest of our time together, you're gonna have a glimpse of us just kind of sitting down and having a conversation about trauma and healing and the hope in the midst of it all. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hey everyone, I'm really excited to introduce you to Amanda Caldwell, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and we have the unique opportunity to talk about trauma from a mental health and emotional health standpoint as we wrestle with our spiritual health. It kind of touches all of the areas of our life. And so Amanda, I'm really glad that you're brave enough to be here with us and to talk about all this stuff with us, and the healing on the other side of this conversation. So really grateful for you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to talk about trauma. Excuse me. It is not something you typically talk about on a Sunday morning at church. But as a therapist, I get excited to talk about trauma. And if you're not in that space or if it goes bad, just blame Brent.
Yeah,
it's always
absolutely
a good idea to blame the pastor.
So it's true.
I have the honor to walk through trauma experiences with people. And what I have found is that it looks and breathes differently in every person. This thing that we call trauma. I think we tend to shy away from using that word trauma in our own experiences because we have these thoughts like, it's so many other people have it so much worse than me, or it can't be that bad. It happened to me like forever ago. Or it could be as simple as like, I'm just anxious. This is going to pass. But trauma is all around us. You really can't avoid it. I'm convinced that most everyone listening to this has had some contact with trauma in their life. As an example, we all went through this thing called the pandemic, if you remember. And we had trauma. There could have been a fear of losing a loved one or not being able to see a loved one, kids getting sick. What were some of your fears?
Just the total isolation and lack of community. What was this? How long was this going to last?
Yes.
The shutdowns, the anger, all of the things that trying to deal with relationships in that season.
So many unknowns. Life as we knew it changed. It was different. It was really gone. But for me, of course, you could be like me and just have a ton of anxiety about running out of toilet paper. But
that anxiety was real for a lot of people.
And even if you go now to grocery stores, you could go and see all of the shelves are stocked with Charmin. But let's say your supply starts to run low, you might still feel a little anxious. That is a silly example, right? But it's true. This is trauma. I use that example because we all won't have this long-term trauma reaction to the pandemic, but life is full of big emotions. And if we can learn to lean into them, look inward, we can actually discover healing and growth. So I want to give an example.
I would love an example.
Isn't this fun?
This is awesome.
Talking about trauma?
Yeah, we're in a living room. We're having a conversation about trauma.
I love it.
And we're okay.
We're having fun. On a Sunday morning.
On a Sunday,
It's actually not Sunday.
It's not Sunday, but it's okay.
So I have a friend who recently had a panic attack while on a Zoom call for work. And he could actually, it was a common thing that was happening. He was having panic attacks on these Zoom calls. He could not figure out what was happening to him. After a lot of work and discovery and processing, he was able to connect what he was feeling on that Zoom call, or trace it back to a time in his childhood when his mom and stepdad were getting a divorce. And I use this example to say, when we have trauma that goes unchecked, it can cause us to feel emotions that are out of place.
Yeah.
And so I'll actually talk about this friend's story in a little bit, but I think it'd be good to first ask the question, what is trauma?
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of people say, like we talked about this, a lot of people are like, oh, I have PTSD over that. And we've kind of even minimized post-traumatic stress disorder to like now just like a phrase that we're like, I got PTSD over that. But I think it's really real to actually notice. I like what you said, like unchecked. Like unchecked trauma, unchecked emotions can actually be driving a lot of our behaviors. And
It can dictate how we're behaving now.
Yeah.
So question is, what is trauma? I want to ask you right now, think about what pops into your head when you think of the word trauma. Some people think of a car crash or abuse or combat trauma. Do you have any words that pop in?
Yeah, I just think about like, I think you said car accident, or like some kind of divorce.
House fire.
Yeah, childhood trauma.
Right.
I think like some of that,
Yeah. So the mental health field suggests that trauma moves beyond that one-time really big travesty experience. Trauma can be in childhood experiences.
Yeah.
It can be in everyday encounters. And it can show up in these sneaky ways, repeating patterns in our lives. So often when you experience trauma, you're no longer in control of what's going on around you. And it's characterized by a feeling of helplessness, and then it overwhelms your ability to cope. Yeah. Do you want me to say that again?
That's perfect.
It's characterized, I want to repeat it because I think it's valuable.
Okay.
It's characterized by a feeling of helplessness, and it can overwhelm your ability to cope. You can imagine this feeling of helplessness is super common among childhood times. Examples of childhood trauma can be as obvious as emotional or sexual abuse or neglect, but it could also be someone telling you to not cry, to dismiss your emotions, being bullied, parents going through a divorce, like you said, being a part of a group that's marginalized. The list can go on and on. These experiences, of course, can be traumatic as an adult, but when they happen during your childhood time, they can be really formative to who you are. There's a statistic, 64% of adults have experienced, in the US, have experienced at least one childhood trauma.
Wow.
Many of us have experienced more than that, for sure. And then just some examples of adulthood trauma, that could be like witnessing or experiencing violence, losing a loved one, getting ill, losing a job, a high stress environment, spiritual abuse. The list, this isn't a comprehensive list, it just is an example to show that there's a lot of trauma experiences, common ones.
Do you think too, like the exposure that we all have to endless amounts of other people's trauma on a screen, like information overload, like trauma on trauma, like global trauma after global trauma after, you know what I mean? Does that, do you feel like that even impacts us without even, we attach a traumatic experience of someone else, even we deeply are moved or affected by it?
For sure. Yeah, you can absolutely experience trauma by witnessing it with someone else. Yeah. I think that brings up a really good point, because we can experience, you can't say that everybody has the same reaction to an experience. So one person could be in a car accident and they could be dramatically impacted by that car accident, and another person could be in a car accident and be unfazed. So we all respond differently to experiences. And so my point with that is that it's important to trace back to how you feel or emote, like what your emotions are to that event.
So we're having this conversation about trauma because we've all been touched by trauma, or we all have relationships with people who have been marked by trauma. And a lot of times we may not even be aware of why we are, to use your word, emoting or responding or behaving, because we're unaware of trauma. So what is kind of the first step in this whole conversation of trauma? What is it? What do we do with it? How do we navigate it? Even if you don't even know it.
You just led me into my next thing that I wanted to share.
It's like we planned this.
I know. Honestly, the next step is awareness.
Yeah.
You can't change something you're not even aware is happening. So let's go back to my friend who had these panic attacks on these work Zoom calls. He was feeling frozen and frigid in these really benign conversations. And memories kept popping up into his mind of these things from when he was a child, when he was feeling all of these feelings. And finally, he was able to recognize, like, he had these feelings like he wanted to run away. He felt trapped. I remember he said he felt overwhelmed. And it, on this like Zoom call, like in his office.
You're just talking about business.
Yeah. And so he was not aware of this deep trauma that he never really worked through when he was a child. So he was able, the first step is to trace what you're feeling. What's he feeling on that Zoom call? He was feeling frozen. And then you want to learn what's the underlying emotion underneath that. For him, it was fear. And then he was able to remember, oh, yes, that's what was happening for me when I was a child, feeling, power that didn't have any power in that dynamic and felt really trapped. And that allowed him, it opened the door for him to start to pursue healing with that childhood trauma. And then is the cool thing, isn't this fun, talking about trauma? The cool thing is that he went back to his present, the present, and was able then to recognize, I'm not trapped in this situation. I actually do have control. I can ground myself in this chair where I am. I have these cool tools I can use. I can start talking to myself about who I am. And, like he was able to then work through it and then have, this great Zoom. Now he can have these Zoom calls, not having all of this panic.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
That is cool.
I do this really cool thing with clients. I think it's cool. When they come in with trauma and loss, we do this thing called a trauma timeline. Have you ever done one?
No.
Okay. So
yes,
I get this.
I have.
You have.
I
Trauma
just have
or
recently.
loss. It can be loss.
Yeah, I just did a chart.
Yeah. So I get a piece of paper, big piece of paper, put it on the table, draw this timeline, and I'll have them put on it some traumas that they've experienced in their life. Typically, did you want to say something?
No, it is a painful but really helpful practice. I would just say it's a painful and really helpful practice to kind of walk through, oh, that did happen, and here's how I felt, and that did happen when I was 9, and here's the feeling that I felt. Like, that was really, you brought a lot of awareness. So
yes, that's why we're talking about awareness. But what I have found with it is that when people come in, they tend to have a couple things on there, and then weeks later, they'll remember all of these other traumas and they start to put that on there. I say that because trauma does this thing to our brains where it tells us that what we've experienced isn't important. When we have something traumatic happen to us, we disassociate from our bodies. And so that's great. Like it's essential in that immediate danger to have this ability that we can actually detach from it to get through it. But the tricky part is that when we are it's great when we're reacting in a way in the immediate danger, but it's not great when the immediate danger has gone and then we continue to react that way.
Almost living in a survivalist mindset versus because when you're in a survival mindset, you're just fight or flight to just live. But that's like high anxiety, high stress, high, and you have to almost reattach to yourself to actually face the real things.
Yes.
I don't know if that made sense.
No, that does. I really like how one person said it. They said anxiety is a normal response to a danger cue. I'll say that again. Anxiety is a normal response to a danger cue, but it becomes pathological when it continues to affect us without the danger cue.
So what are some of the symptoms that you see, like, that we could all be maybe exuding, showing, that are pointing to a trauma event in our life or something deeper underlying?
Yeah. So what I would ask is just, I'll list some things, and then just kind of listen to it, allow your body and your mind to just see if there's anything that you resonate with. There's a lot of words I can say right now, but so words such as anxiety, depression, irritability, mood swings, physical pain, intrusive thoughts, hopelessness, lack of being able to concentrate, zoning out, feeling hyper alert, having guilt, shame, feeling withdrawn. I've pretty much described humans everywhere.
Yeah, you even told me sleep issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Totally. But these are signs of trauma.
Yeah.
So what I want to say is, if what you're thinking is aligning with any of these thoughts or symptoms that I've shared, I really, really, really want you to know that you are not alone. Hope and healing is totally possible. I believe that with my heart. I can attest to it in my own life and in so many lives that I have seen changed. So what do we do about it? This is the fun part. This is where it becomes fun, because I know everyone's like, we know what trauma is.
Trauma is cool, but this is the fun part of it.
Yeah. Well, I think talking about trauma is cool, but so I'm going to give you 3 things that you can do.
Okay.
You like these,
I like the bullet points. Yeah.
So first, recognize its impact. So I encourage everyone to feel your feels. Explore your emotions, try to journal, take time to really understand what you're feeling. For me, sometimes it's just going on a walk and praying and talking to God. That allows me to get into that feeling space. It's different for everyone, but recognize its impact, number 1.
Yeah, I'd say a good cry is necessary from time to time.
Yes.
And I'm not a crier much anymore in my life. And but debriefing with my wife and just kind of like vomiting about my day and about my feelings can be overwhelming to those you're vomiting on, but is super helpful for me to even recognize, like, what am I feeling and what am I going through? Because I don't want I don't want it to be this underlying thing that comes up in a surprising time. I want to be aware of them.
For sure. It's great practice for her too, as she's pursuing her therapy license. Yeah. So recognizing its impact. And then the second one is just taking care of yourself. Yeah. I know that word self-care can be floated out there and kind of bug people because we use it a lot. But healing from trauma takes a lot of energy. And so it's really important to care for yourself. Give yourself rest, breaks, engage in things like prayer, meditation, deep breathing, not isolating. There's so many things you can do with self-care.
Go to the beach.
Go to the beach.
Take a breath. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hike.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hike.
We live in a perfect area for that.
We do. We really do. Actually, as a trained therapist, one thing that we're trained to do when someone's going through trauma is to focus on 3 things: food, sleep, and exercise. Yeah. And so if a client comes in and is in trauma, I say to them, I'm trained to say, this is your only job right now. Your job is to try to eat some really good food, get some rest, and get some exercise. Yeah. It's been clinically proven to improve symptoms of PTSD to get exercise. Our bodies need all of those feel-good chemicals in them, like endorphins, and it's those 3 things are really important. So recognize its impact, take care of yourself. And then the third one was to start creating healthy pathways in your brain. So that's new thought patterns in response to things that are happening around you. Sometimes it can be as simple as changing what you're doing when you're triggered. So going to my friend that was having a Zoom call, and if he's being triggered, just standing up and moving and stretching can actually help his body respond differently to the trigger. And finally, I would say reaching out to a trauma-informed therapist can really help, because they have some really cool techniques and strategies to help retrain your brain to stop dictating what you're doing now, to stop having your past dictate how you're behaving now.
That makes me think about, like, to bring in like a biblical reference to that, it made me think about Romans 12, where Paul says, and don't be formed to the pattern of this world or the trauma of this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. The constantly like retraining my brain to think in a more healthy, like, I see myself the way God sees me. I'm going to walk through this reality the way God sees this reality, and I'm going to retrain my brain. It's not like, it's kind of cool how God even makes our brain have the ability to be renewed and retrained. It's so cool. Yeah.
Yes. So. We have these funny things that we say as therapists, and one of them, which I love, is, you might have heard this already, but our lives are like our lives are like wet cement. Have you heard this?
No.
So, lives are like wet cement. So you can look at your past and it's all hardened in its shapes, right? And you can go back and you can discover, learn about yourself. You can even add, where was God in this? What was he doing in my life? And then currently you can choose to live in the present and change and have something different for who you are, or you can choose to continue to repeat those patterns. And so I love that lives are like wet cement, because we always have opportunity to embrace change and newness and invite God into that part of your life.
Awesome.
So, Brent, I'm sure you're wondering.
I am. What am I wondering?
How do you help people in your life that are going through trauma?
Yeah, that's why we're talking about this.
Yes.
Because like for us individually, but also for one another, like because we're not supposed to be doing this alone. So how is that a rhetorical question?
No, I want to answer it.
Okay,
but
I would love for you to answer it.
I think we all really deeply want to help people when they're going through trauma, and our hearts are in the right place. But it's important to remind yourself that you cannot make their pain disappear. It's important to accept what they're going through, recognize it takes time, rest, and all the appropriate support for them to heal. So some things to do let them know you're available, you're there, you're present if they need you. Don't take their feelings to heart. Oftentimes people are irritable or angry. Those kind of feelings are so normal for trauma.
I found like, even in some of my suffrages or pain, I'll be dismissive, or I'll get a little bit irritable or agitated. And even in other people that I've noticed things, it'll be like, why are you being short with me? I'm trying to help you. But that empathy is huge.
Yes.
Huge.
Just being okay with that. Being okay with it. And then do practical things. I know we all will make a meal for someone who's in need, but like other things like laundry, pick up their kids, if a friend misses school, go get their notes for them from school. Don't ask them what you can do, just do that stuff. Do the practical that would help you if you are going through it. Let's see what else. You could encourage them in the food, sleep, exercise by hey, do you want to go for a walk? Because that would be really helpful to them. What else? If they want to talk about their trauma, it's really important, if they're open to that, to be calm, to show acceptance, and just to listen. Sometimes people say things that are really hurtful, oh, let's look on the bright side, or let's look for the silver lining. Try to avoid those general phrases, because those aren't helpful. Just be comfortable sitting with them in the muck, or be comfortable sitting outside of the muck if they're not ready for you to be in it with them.
Oh, that's good.
So
not be a quick fixer or a prescribing all the things that they need to do, but just to, Brene Brown talks about sitting with people and that empathy, and sitting in the mess with them, and not even saying, here's what you should do, but I'm just here with you.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
But I'm only here with you if you're inviting me to be here with you.
Yeah. And I'm okay if you don't want me there.
Yeah.
You have to accept that. Yeah. It's important. Well, lastly, what I want to say is just that when I have seen people pursue healing through trauma, they have a real deep sense of self afterward, great self-esteem. I've seen their communication skills just become so much better. They're these wonderful, healthy communicators with people in their lives because they've had to do that work. And then they have this really deeper appreciation for life,
Yeah.
which is really cool. I like to call it grit, or it creates this beautiful resilience in them. And that's the beautiful thing about life, is that we can go through something and we don't have to have that define who we are. We can choose to take that and move in whatever direction we want. And God is the greatest storyteller in our lives. And He has this ability to help us grow and change and be who we want to be.
And He meets us in the middle. Like you said,
meets
He meets us in the middle of the muck.
Yes.
Right? And He's with us in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's super important, like, talking about this, because many of us have endured something that we aren't even aware of. And so, like, in my mind, even just as I'm listening to you, I'm like, okay, like, what do I need to be aware of? Like, who do I need to bring in? Like, how do I need to take care of myself? How do I need to actually help and step into someone else's experience because God gives us this community of people, this collection of people, to lift one another up and walk with each other through these things. Not sweep it under the rug, not suck it up and deal with it and suppress it, but to really face it. And I love what you said, like, it just creates this resilience in us, this strength in us when we grow in awareness, grow in understanding of ourselves and the things that are impacting us in a real way. So I think that gives every single one of us courage to maybe take a step, whether that's grabbing a friend, setting up an appointment with a therapist or a pastor, or just doing some of that work of even writing out, man, what things have happened to me in my life that could be impacting me? Why am I getting angry or anxious, or why am I responding like this? I just think it's super helpful. So I know I just got all excited at the end, but I'm just really grateful that you like kind of put in the work to present that to us and present this conversation to normalize a lot of the exhaustion that a lot of people are feeling right now in the wake of a pandemic and social unrest and racial division and all the things that we constantly see on our feeds and we experience in relationships. You've normalized it, and I think it's really healthy and powerful for us. So thank you for being a part of this. And you're awesome, and I'm just really grateful that our church gets to have this conversation. I don't know about you, but that conversation about trauma and about all the things that you and I can face or have dealt with in childhood or in life or have noticed in the world around us and how that marks us is super important. And I love that we see this in Jesus's interaction with this man who's been living in the tombs for most of his life, gashing himself with stones in this deep pain and agony. Remember, he runs to Jesus and he says, Jesus, don't torment me because I've been tormented my entire life. And I want you to notice how Jesus responds. He's been praying for this man and he's been imploring that these unclean or impure spirits, all of these afflictions that have been done to him, all the things that he's done, shame, guilt, this whole cesspool of anxiety and pain and suffering afflicting this man. Jesus speaks to those things, and then he says to the man, he says, but what is your name? What is your name? And I think there's something powerful in that question that this man comes to grips with. He says, our name is Legion, for we are many. And there's a demonic part to this, but there's also a reality that there are many things afflicting this person. And there was this moment of awareness. There was this moment where Jesus says, what is your name? And in that moment, Jesus begins the healing process in this man's heart, in his mind, in his soul, and in his life. So much so that he's put together, and these local herdsmen and farmers come around and see the man that had lived in the tombs, that had terrorized everybody by his affliction and his pain, is now sitting in his right mind. And they are in awe of the healing work of Jesus, of the way that Jesus can interact with a man, talk about his pain, talk about his trauma and his suffering, pray for him, and lead him to a place of being put together in a place of resilience, of strength, where he's sitting up, he's in his right mind. And then I want you to notice this. In Mark chapter 5, Jesus says, now I want you to go home to this man who's been living in the tombs. Everybody knows who he is. Everybody knows his pain, knows his suffering. He says, I want you to go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. That word mercy literally means to step into the muck. To chesed mercy is to like be covered in the muck of someone else, to actually step into the experience of how God has had mercy on you. And so this man stands up, he heads home, and many people were amazed at his resilience. Many people were amazed at the strength that he exuded in his life. And I believe that healing, that hope, that resilience is possible for you and I. When we come face to face with some of the things that we've probably been afraid to face throughout our life, when we come face to face with some of the reasons why we choose not to feel, or we go to some coping mechanism, or we go to isolation, when we make the courageous decision to step into the trauma, to step into the pain, to acknowledge it, to bring somebody else in, to care for ourselves, to voice it, to vocalize it, and to bring it before Jesus, to bring it before one another, we can find a healing. And that healing changes everything. Legend says that this man goes back to his hometown, and many people find healing because of his healing. Many people find strength because of his strength. Many people find faith because of the way that he ran into Jesus, and everything changed. What have you faced? What have you gone through? What affliction, what pain, what trauma? Would you acknowledge it? Would you bring it before Jesus? And would you find a healing that changes everything? Let's pray. God, we love you. And we thank you for this very important conversation. And we thank you for this very important interaction in Jesus' life that teaches us it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to bring ourselves to Jesus. It's okay to acknowledge the things that have cut us and have wounded us and have hurt us and marked us deeply. And God, in you, we find a great healer who knows us, who wants to renew our minds, who wants us to put us back together, who wants our wholeness and our completeness. So give us the courage to take the next step, to find healing, and a healing that changes everything. We love you, and we thank you for loving us. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.